do if it did cloud.
Yeah. Great.
We'll start at like 33.
Okay.
We're going to give it 2 minutes, folks, and then we'll get started.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're going to get started here, folks. So appreciate you coming to this neighborhood meeting to talk about the solar project proposed on Knox Road. I think what we'll do is some quick intros and then we'll jump into the purpose and need of the project. Our priority is to take time, obviously, to introduce the project. We're going to show you a quick presentation, but then ultimately we want to get to your questions. So if you bear with us, we'll be able to give you that quick overview and then try to use everybody's time efficiently this evening. So my name is Chris Byers. I'm here with BRI, Biodiversity Research Institute, helping on their project team with the development of this project.
I'm Meryl Reed. I'm a project manager here with BRI. And I've been working on this Bar Harbor project on the permitting side and all the due diligence work that has gone into it.
And then we've got Steve Blake here from BH2M.
Everybody.
Steve did all of our stormwater design. We also have Steve Knapp on the line from BRI. Steve was the out there flagging the wetlands and looking at the vernal pools, so figured it would be helpful to have him on the call. And then we've got Steve Thompson here. Thanks, Steve. So Steve is a landscape architect, but also does a lot of our visual analysis for us on our solar projects. So Steve will be able to speak to some of the visual that we've been doing, as well as the tree planting plans. And we've got Evan Moreau from Krebs and Lansing.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Evan. Evan did the site plan design for us in coordination with BRI. We're almost done. I know it seems like we have more speakers here than attendees, but we're just trying to bring on the right experts. Then we've got Dave Evers, who's the executive director of Biodiversity Research Institute.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Dave. And then last but not least, we've got Micah Stanley from EDPR, who's going to be the owner and operator of this project.
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Micah.
How you
Great.
doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for hopping on. You're a little bit muffled. I don't know if you can get closer to your audio, but just want to make sure we can hear from you if we need to.
Any better?
Oh, maybe.
What about now?
That's good. That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, man. Good. All right, let's jump into the presentation. We're gonna screen share here. Great. So
Wait, I don't
let's
know if
go.
it's screen sharing, sorry.
Oh,
1 second.
sorry. Bear with us.
Here we go.
Yeah, just do that screen. That's okay. We can look at yours there. It's hard to move.
Great.
Okay, Steve Thompson, thumbs up that you can see this. Okay, great. I assume that means everybody else can. So I guess I just wanted to start off this presentation by letting folks know that this is certainly a public meeting, and we're glad that you're here, but it's really meant to be a neighborhood meeting. So we sent out notices to people that have properties within 500 feet of the project area. So you may be here because you received one of these letters. You may be here because you were just on the outside of that. Either way, we were trying to focus the invite for this meeting on people that would have an immediate concern about the project. This is definitely not a required meeting based on our site plan review process with the planning board. So, this isn't meant to be kind of like a public hearing where we've got planning board members in attendance. This is us wanting to reach out because we think it's important to be a part of the, to get community voice in the development of this project. Cool. So, I think you've probably heard about a lot of solar projects in the news all over Maine. And really for the last 3 years, we've seen a rapid deployment of solar energy across the state. And that's because of two key bills that were passed back in 2019, LD 1711 and LD 1494. And to spare you the details of kind of all the nitpicky stuff, basically it allowed larger projects to be deployed in Maine. But the key was that those projects needed to benefit Mainers. And so we've got a picture here of Governor Mills with a bunch of people standing in front of a project that I think I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's a project in Maine. Anyway, so the idea here is that, projects like this are meant to serve residences, municipalities, commercial customers, you name it. But all of the, we call them off-takers, all the people benefiting from this, all the off-takers need to be within the same utility territory as the project. So this is a Versant project. That means anybody that lives in Versant territory can benefit from the project. I want to sort of separate this project from the NECEC project, which many of you probably were well aware of. This is the CNP corridor. This is totally unrelated, has no bearing on that. So we're really focusing on local energy. I think the way that I have oftentimes felt about these projects, I know that they're a big change in the state, and they definitely are something that you maybe were used to seeing in other states. And I kind of compare it to how we look at food. So, if we want to go to our local farmers market, we do so because we feel like, it's important to support resources that are nearby, but also we want to know where our food comes from. And I think there's a big part of that that translates to energy, where it's helpful to know where our energy comes from. We all turn on our lights and we all kind of take it for granted, but we don't really know why that light went on. And so what's happening now across the state is we're providing renewable energy resources like this that are feeding into the grid versus what might be on your home. Some of you may even have solar on your home, which is great. These programs are different in that we're putting power directly onto the grid, and then people can subscribe to them at no cost, whether you're a business or a residential customer. They can subscribe to the projects and benefit from the credits that are applied to their bills from projects like this. So while we have people purchasing while we have people subscribing to the projects that are residential and commercial customers, those electrons from this project are going into the grid, feeding all different types of circuits across the state. So again, it's about where is our power coming from? Now we can kind of point to these projects, and certainly they're an impact, right? We don't pretend to say these are going to be no big deal. That's why we're having this meeting, but we want to kind of carve that out a little bit more to help Bar Harbor understand, the residents about, the details of this project. I guess lastly on the slide, we want to point out that Bar Harbor has been pretty aggressive with coming up with a climate action plan. Even the town itself has issued an RFP for I think it's a 2 megawatt project. I can't remember the exact location of it, but they've issued an RFP for their own municipal services to have a project that would be sited on MDI. And at the same time, while we've got this project being proposed as well as theirs, a big limiting factor with solar is how much your local substation can carry. So I worked on a project once in Unity, and I remember somebody distinctly saying in the planning board, sort of pretty seriously, like, how do we know that, you guys aren't just going to take over the town and it's not going to be solar everywhere? And, my answer to them is my same answer to you guys on this call, which is that, there are only so many solar projects that can feed your circuits and the local substation before that substation is maxed out. So, you're not going to see one of these projects being proposed every month for the next year. You might only see like 3 or 4 projects at max, and maybe these projects alone are enough to cap out that substation. Obviously, there's not a ton of land available on MDI to build these projects. So I just want to point out that this is not meant to be kind of the first of many kind of solar sprawl concerns. We do have a limiting factor based on capacity at the substation. All right, so want to just talk real quick about construction of these projects. We've got a couple key images here from projects that are sited across the Northeast, and similar conditions here. So when we're building a solar project, the first step is we've got to look at site prep. So for this particular project, and we'll get to the site plan, we're talking more in generic terms right now, but we will need to clear trees and remove those stumps. However, we don't have to do a ton of grading. Obviously, the land needs to be smoothed out so we can operate equipment and move in and around it. But we also don't need to grade the project area like we're building a Walmart parking lot, which would need to be like a flat as a pancake. We can deal with undulations, we can deal with topography to a certain extent. And this project was cited and chosen because we knew that we wouldn't have to drastically modify the terrain out there. When we clear the trees and we remove the stumps, we then move to racking foundations, which if you look in the top left corner, you'll see these 2 operators pounding posts into the ground on a project. And so the idea here is similar. We've got a post really that's driven into the ground that's not going to require concrete, and is I don't know, it depends on the geotechnical analysis, but they may be 6 to 8 feet into the ground, depending on soil types and whatnot. But they go pretty far into the ground. Can you move that little? I don't know if they can see that. Just like minimize or move it over to the left, maybe bottom left. Sorry, technical difficulty.
I think just sorry to interrupt. We might. I don't know if it's just me, but I think we're viewing the presenter screen as opposed to the full screen mode.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Let's do. Thank you. We're
May have
learning
to
how to use
maybe
Zoom.
going to Zoom and choosing that
slideshow.
screen. How about now, Steve?
Perfect. I think
Okay.
that's much better. Yep.
Okay.
There we go.
Cool. So top right picture shows the racking assembly. So we've just got some basic steel purlins and support structures with the solar panels mounted on top. The vast majority of the wiring is tucked up underneath the solar panels, and then we trench underground between all the different rows. The project will have some overhead poles, but those are all going to be sited on the existing road for the most part that'll connect into Knox Road. Different than a transmission line, these projects connect using pretty typical poles that you would see for your own home. on this project area. So we're not building like, you know, an NECEC project to interconnect, and we're definitely not building a substation. We are just simply connecting right into the existing distribution power lines. And then once the, you know, the racking structures are up, we've got all of our wiring in. We then need to erect a fence around the outside of this. And so the fencing here will be a agricultural style fence that's actually rated for bison. So certainly strong enough for what we need it to be here. And it will be between 7 and 8 feet tall. The National Electric Code actually requires us to have a minimum 7-foot tall fence around the project area. But we also, you know, understand that sometimes this fencing can come in 8-foot heights. So that's why I'm saying 7 to 8 feet tall. And then we'll have a, you know, a project gate at the front. In terms of impervious area, there is very little on the project. And really that's true for most solar projects out there. In the bottom right-hand side, you can see a typical image of an equipment pad that would house like the transformer, some switch gear, and monitoring equipment. And so, you know, we route all the underground infrastructure to a pad that would look something like this. We don't need to have a roof over it. We don't need a structure. We don't have like a shed on site. All this equipment, as you see it in that bottom right-hand corner, is meant to be outdoor rated and, you know, painted some sort of green or gray color, whatever those cabinets typically are. And then I guess, oh, sorry, last thing, then the vegetation. So, you know, the site's obviously going to be under construction. And then in order for us to remove all of our erosion and sedimentation controls around the perimeter, we would need to have 95% vegetation growing. And the goal here is to use a pollinator friendly meadow mix, which we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about habitat enhancement that we're proposing on the project. But basically it's a grass mix that we can't mow more than twice per year. So for folks that live directly adjacent to this project, we don't expect to have, you know, somebody there more than maybe 4 times a year in a pickup truck, and no more than twice per year, which includes those visits, would you hear a mower out there. And the reason for that is we need to maintain the grass as a stormwater buffer. Again, we'll get into that a little bit later with Steve Blake on the stormwater stuff. So that's a general overview of construction. Let's jump in a little bit on the site plan now. Okay. Can I use your little cursor? I'm like pointing and stuff. Okay. All right. Where is it? Okay. Oh, I don't know if they can see that. Steve Thompson, can you see the cursor on the page?
I do not see, no, I don't.
Right there.
Oh,
Oh.
now I do, yep, now I do.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I'll try to go slow here. And I know that Zoom can lag a little bit. So basic orientation here. Oops, why isn't it disappearing? Sorry. Okay, so we've got Knox Road here on the far west side. Knox Road runs north-south. This whole site plan is oriented with north to the top. So there's an existing access drive that comes off of Knox Road and gets in mostly to the project area. We would only need to clear some trees here and there and limb them. See, that cursor just keeps disappearing. I'm just gonna have to talk about it. So we only have to limb a few trees, but generally we're leaving that same access road. And then further into the project, we'll be crossing a small wetland. So there'll be a small amount of wetland fill. But other than that, we're not filling any wetlands beyond this small section. I don't know if it's like a couple hundred square feet, something like that. But that road then enters into the project area. There is a light blue line just slightly outside of the solar panels that you see there. Can't get my cursor to work. It's fine.
There's also an annotate option up at the top. There should be
Oh,
a
the
view
little-
options
this
tab
little,
and
like,
you can go
laser thing?
annotate.
Thanks, Steve. You should be doing this presentation. Okay. All right, so this line right here that I'm drawing is approximately the limit of tree clearing. So the parcel itself is about 53 acres. And then we are occupying with our project, which is mostly represented here with that blue line that I drew, 14.7 acres. So the rest of the wetlands that you see to the north, as well as the wetlands and vernal pools that were mapped to the southeast, would remain untouched and undeveloped even after this project is constructed. The racking are these rows that are going east-west. Yeah, I think we'll jump into kind of a couple of the other details, like talking about the tree buffering and how far away we are, but that's just the general layout and overview, I guess, of the project. So if you just go next slide.
Maybe one more time. Oh, the stuff is
I think
gonna
I
show
get-
up on the side.
I think I got to get rid of it. Here, you do it.
Okay,
Sorry.
we're learning here. Okay.
Okay.
There's the information on the side.
Right. Okay. Yeah, now we got to clear that. All right, so do you want to talk briefly about like some of the wetlands mapping that we've done here, due diligence to date?
Yeah, so as you can see on site, minus the blue line that's still lingering, there's wetlands delineated on site and a stream that kind of disperses into that larger wetland in the northern part and then goes off site and becomes a stream channel again. And then in the eastern portion of the site, there's a couple of smaller wetlands, and this is where we have found some vernal pools. So for vernal pools, there's a couple of regulations that you have to follow when they're significant. And these were done last spring. So Steve Knaps, who's on the call, he did those
In April.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then in October is when the actual delineation happens. So you can see the pictures on the right are photos of that from that delineation. We have the access road that's already existing there. Is that upper right-hand photo with some of the vegetation on the sides. And then a typical like forest photo is on the bottom right-hand, and you can see some regenerative smaller trees there amongst larger DBH trees. And then let's see what else.
Yeah, so I think we've been to the site twice to perform this delineation. We went in April of 21 for the vernal pool season to make sure we were doing that within the seasonal window to observe, spotted salamanders, et cetera. But then went back in October to perform the larger delineation. So 2 different site visits for that.
Yep. Okay, if I can get out of this again.
Yep. So then I think, the next slide is talking about some of the due diligence that we've done with state agencies. Yep, there we go. Perfect. All right, go.
Yeah, so in doing our due diligence for this project, you can kind of see on this map right here, there's a smaller section of the parcel that we've been showing, and that's where that limit of disturbance is, where the tree clearing will happen and where all the project infrastructure is going to be. And in that consultation, while we're doing our natural resources and checking out the site in person, we're also talking with the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And so with them, we reach out to them and ask them if there's any significant habitat that the parcel occupies. And so this map kind of shows where they have these mapped habitats that you don't really want to build in, because for deer wintering areas, obviously that's where deer winter, and that is a certain type of forest that they like to have as their habitat. And then there's also waterfowl and wading bird habitats that are depicted there, and conservation land is also listed. So as you can see, this parcel is not in any of those habitats, which is what we got back from them. And same with the Maine Natural Areas Program, we consult with them about different things in the area, such as like grasses and anything that comes up as endangered or you don't want to build a project on because it's very valuable. So they have that listed, and they got back to us and said there's nothing within the project area that should harm any of their concerns. And then we also reach out to the Maine Historic Preservation Office. So Maine's an old place. There's a lot of historic buildings around Maine that we have to consult with them to make sure that we're not, our project isn't gonna be within that those historic areas. And that can also be like graveyards or something like that. So we reached out to them, and they also did not come back with any historic places. And we also went out there to take photos of historic locations around, like near in the area, none of which were on site. And the MHBC said you're good to go.
I know there are folks on the call that probably have questions about wildlife habitat. So, this slide is meant to just show you what our consultation has been with state agencies, but by no means do we use this to say, hey, no big deal. We'll get to those concerns and comments. So just wanted to make sure that it's not perceived that we're somehow glossing over this topic. So I guess, another piece of due diligence for us has been visual. And, Steve Thompson from TJDNA based in Yarmouth has done a pretty comprehensive visual analysis. And so we're going to walk through a couple of the slides, not only kind of on the micro level of the impact that we're seeing maybe right at the edge of the project, but really even as far as Cadillac. So Steve's taken a pretty comprehensive look at this. We'll let him take the mic and walk through this.
Thank you, Chris. So when we do visual impact assessment on projects like this, we whether it's renewable energy or large scale development or small scale development, we start by just trying to discover what is important about this area, what is important at the community level, what's important at the regional level, what's important at the state level, and we look to identify resources which we call scenic resources or visually sensitive resources. These can include parks and trails, historic resources, scenic views that have been designated at a local or state level, scenic byways, as is highlighted in the orange here. And we start by inventorying those when we're looking at solar projects, generally within a 3-mile area. So again, these are publicly accessible places that whether they're privately owned or not, they're accessible to the public for, at least in part, enjoyment of the scenery. Outside of 3 miles, we typically focus only on elevated viewpoints, which are typically on mountains, which there are plenty of in this region, but occasionally maybe on a scenic byway or some other kind of trail. And looking at this map here, while we have the outer ring there is actually a 5-mile radius. In our analysis, we took our study all the way out to 8 miles. It was just a little bit easier to show the scale of the project in the region here on this map. The next step, once we have identified those scenic resources, is to look at whether or not there could be potential visibility of the project from them. And to do that, we generate what are called viewshed maps, which is a computer-based process that shows us essentially where in the landscape a viewer might see parts of this project. Kind of staying on this map for a minute, ultimately we determined that visibility is highly limited for this project based on its siting, based on the vegetation surrounding it. Ultimately, we only determined that, we'll look at another map after this, but in the immediate project area, there's only minimal visibility to the north of the project, and then 2 little splotches of visibility on Cadillac Mountain. And if we actually go back to that other map, while these areas may look kind of large and a little scary showing on Cadillac Mountain, this yellow areas of visibility are actually only visibility of the transmission poles that are part of the project. So starting with our viewshed analysis, this initially told us that solar panels are only going to be visible from one private parcel to the north of the project, as well as potentially filtered views to the nearest abutters, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this viewshed process is sort of the second step in our methodology that gives us a sense of where is the project theoretically visible from, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's go to sort of the larger scale. So like I said, we determined there was visibility of a single pole from Cadillac Mountain. So we did go to that mountain and photograph a view towards that direction. Now, when we think about visibility at this scale and at the object we're looking at, we're talking the tip of a single transmission pole. This is similar to the wooden 30 to 40 foot transmission poles you see along the side of the road. At approximately 6 miles away, I believe this shot's over 6 miles away, this will be indistinguishable in the landscape. So while the computer can see it, while it's theoretically visible, this is not going to become a dominating piece of the landscape. You're not going to see solar panels from anywhere on Cadillac Mountain or any other mountain. And you're not going to see any project clearing area, but technically, because we wanted to check it while that visibility is minimal, we obtained this photo to just get a sense of the scale of the view that you see here. And that little yellow arrow is pointing to where the project, that pole is located. So one of the great things about Bar Harbor is it has a solar ordinance. So we have our standard methodology that we look at with visual impact assessment. But in addition to that, we had this ordinance that also helps guide what is important visually to the town. And not only did this include public scenic resources like Acadia and some of those obvious ones, but they also considered the abutting properties, the abutting private properties in this case. So one thing we did to try to understand at least the current visibility of potential visibility of the project from some of these abutting properties is to go on the project site and take a photo looking towards those residential properties. Now, what do we see here? We see trees and we see a house in the background. Well, that tells us that if you were on the other end of this, if you were standing at that house, you might have a filtered view of the project. So we took a couple photos along the boundary line here. You can just cycle through that. And what this is showing us is that there is existing vegetation that will remain between the project and these private residences. But it's still a filtered manner, and in order to enhance that, we would need to mitigate that. So the next step was to
And Steve, hey,
create.
Steve, sorry, just
Yeah.
to clarify, when you took these pictures, you were standing on the tree clearing limit line, right?
We
Not
were
the property
standing on the
line.
tree,
Yeah.
absolutely. So when the trees you see in front of you here are going to remain.
Right. Yeah.
So in addition to those trees remaining, that clearing line, that thicker line is where we were standing, to sort of make up for those gaps in the vegetation that may provide views towards the project. We proposed a buffer screening plan. So we had to sort of, we chose species, some cultivars that were evergreen and would, grow to a sufficient width, but not a height that would cause shading on the project. So we tried to, at least in this initial stab, create something that is going to block the project without causing shading on that southern end of the project.
It's about 580 feet of tree plantings.
That's right.
Around there.
Yeah, about 580 feet. So overall, our analysis determined that this project is highly screened just due to its siting, which is pretty remarkable, all considered, especially with this area and the amount of topography we have.
And I think that's great and feedback, Steve. I think another point that I want to make here on this slide, you can see that we've got a 25-foot measurement from the property line to the clearing. So when we did our initial design with Evan at Krebs and Lansing, we certainly could have cleared up to the tree clearing to the property line, based on what activity is allowed. But we intentionally came off of that property line and planted these trees here, knowing that for these direct abutters that this would be a concern. So we've just gotten ahead of that to propose it without being reactive and having to kind of take feedback and then be told that we need it. So we're trying to take steps here to address what we know are likely questions and comments that are going to come from people that are right up against this property line. So, but to Steve's point, where those pictures were taken, those are all taken on the tree clearing limit. So everything in those pictures would remain.
And we understand that, abutters can manage their properties in a certain way. So that was another reason for providing, maintaining some existing vegetation within the ownership, within the property lines of this project, and then enhancing it with the new screening.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to transition to Steve Blake here from BH2M to talk about stormwater. And then Dave Evers, just as like kind of on deck, we're going to have you also jump in. I won't change this slide because I think this slide plays to your presentation, but we'll start with Steve Blake first, just to talk about how we're going to make sure stormwater isn't a problem in the project.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, this is actually a good representative photo of kind of what we try to do in terms of our stormwater analysis. This project gets reviewed by DEP. We've designed this to conform to Chapter 500 standards. And for a project of this size, that's generally focused on basic standards, which are kind of like erosion control procedures that are needed both during construction, but also post-construction. So one of the things that DEP has asked solar projects to do is to create underneath the panels or within the array, to create a kind of a self-treating meadow buffer in those areas to try to recreate the kind of the natural hydrology that exists there today. One of the nice things, I think Chris touched on this a little bit earlier, is we don't, for this project, we don't have to do much grading at all. We can kind of keep the topography the way it is, establish this buffer, and really control the runoff from the site. With DEP, they asked us to design some best management practices, and those for a project like this include things like level spreaders, erosion control barrier, just procedures that you put in place during construction, and then also post-construction. And then also the town of Bar Harbor has their own stormwater standards too. So we have a report that analyzes both the pre-development runoff condition and as a comparison, what that looks like in the developed condition as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So, I think the important thing is, when we look at forested condition versus a meadow condition, your take on that is that it will similarly attenuate the stormwater. And I think by DEP standards, we're not allowed to have any more runoff than has already been happening on the site. So we're sort of bound by those rules. Otherwise, we'd be in violation.
Correct.
Cool. Anything else, Steve, that you wanted to throw in there?
No, that was it. I mean, these are, in terms of stormwater, it's, this is really low impact development. It's, you're putting in panels, they're disconnected. They're, you're really trying to promote just, recreating the natural hydrology of that area and, promote infiltration back into the resource.
Great. So I know we're getting long here in our presentation, but I wanted to just touch base lastly with Dave Evers, who again is the Executive Director of Biodiversity Research Institute. Dave is going to talk about some of the habitat enhancement strategies that we have on this project area to help outline this. And Dave, maybe before you jump into talking about that, just give the group a quick kind of blurb on your background. I think it's helpful, given what you've spent your life's work on.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So for Biodiversity Research Institute, we're a nonprofit research group based in Portland area. And we have worked with the federal and state government over the last 25, 30 years to answer questions that regulators may have and to be the detectives to understand what is happening in the environment. A lot of times our work revolves around contaminants or revolves around renewable energy, including hydro and wind power, but also solar power. And that information is gathered in a scientific fashion, published, is presented. And I think that scientific based sort of approach is a good one that we really follow. And so for solar arrays, for example, there's a lot of interest right now. It's happening right now by the state and federal government to apply funding through what they call RFPs, requests for proposals, for research groups like ours and academics to better understand what is happening in these systems and how that the impact to the environment can be minimized or reduced or even enhanced. And that's the challenge in front of all of us as a society. We all need energy. We're going through an energy change right now from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And the challenge is, how do we go about that in the right and proper way? And from a solar standpoint, there are methods that are just being developed now that we're exploring with the federal government and the state government, how to enhance habitat for wildlife concerns. And the concern right now across Maine, across the US, is that there is a major decline in pollinators, so species of butterflies, moths, and bees. There's major declines in aerial avian invertebrates, so just simply swallows, birds that fly around and catch bugs. And there's major declines in bats. 99% of the little brown bats that were once common on MDI, and we conduct a lot of bat research for the Acadia National Park. Most all your little brown bats are gone. And there's many other species that are now endangered, such as the northern long-eared bat. And you have some species of bats like a small-footed bat that are in the teleslopes year-round on MDI. So those are the concerns that I kind of look at as what are those larger overarching sort of declines in some of the wildlife around us that we hope or assume that will always be there. But if we're not careful, they can have these declines. And so working on some of these solar areas, the idea that we're working on now, again, with the government and can apply to some of these sites is to enhance some of these like stormwater areas that Steve just mentioned and have more plantings that increase pollinators' interest. So just more flowers, frankly, and greater insect biomass or invertebrate biomass is good for aerial invertebrates like swallows and bluebirds, and at night, bats. And that's sort of food that is needed right now to increase those sort of species around these systems and could be used around these systems. And just lastly, there's other ways that are very traditional ways of putting out bird boxes or bat boxes that can also enhance some of these sites. So there's just a little bit of an overarching sort of look at maybe how this site can kind of fit into this larger interest, not just on MDI, but across the state of Maine.
Cool.
Chris?
Thanks, Dave. That's great. I think we're going to wrap up the presentation at this point, and I know we've gone 37 minutes here. I think I'm going to try to facilitate this so that we can make sure people are heard. Is there some sort of like a way to view? Yeah, stop sharing.
Yeah.
Great. So I think is there like a raise hand function on this?
Yeah, on the bottom.
Yeah.
Go to reactions.
Yep. So I guess if you can, at the bottom of your screen, folks, there's a button called reactions, then you could raise your hand. We'll do our best to kind of get to that and look for your hand here as we go. So that would be helpful. And I guess if you wanted to put something in the chat, you could try that. We're just not super Zoom literate here. So why don't we start off, see if somebody's got their hand raised. Who's that? Oh no.
Oh, Matt Bartlett.
Okay, Matt, go ahead.
Matt, I see you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you if you're speaking.
Yep, we can see you on the screen too.
Matt,
No.
maybe if you want to type your message, just because we can't hear you, we can go that way.
We'll write down your name though, Matt, in case we can't get to you for whatever reason.
I just want to say, if Matt mutes himself and you unmute him, I bet you're going to hear him.
Yeah, we did unmute him.
Yeah, we're
but
hitting the
I think
ask to
his-
unmute, but I think it might be a microphone issue on his end. How about now, Matt? Nope.
Yeah, you're unmuted, but the mic is just not
Yeah.
working. If you type your thing, we'll
Yeah,
we'll call on
Let's
someone
get it.
else. and
We'll
then-
call on someone else. We got it's your message there. Okay. Can you somehow close that chat?
Yeah.
window? Or like
Is that better?
maybe.
Oh, there we
got you,
go.
Matt.
We can hear you.
All right, good off the headphones. Thank you very much. I do have several questions. I'm in a butter to the property. Who is Bar Harbor Solar? And you know what? I never heard of him before. So would like to have that kind of information. Who you are, who you're representing. And then I just want to express my concern of, you know, the tree cutting behind our house, the runoff, what the solar panels are made out of. So I have several questions, but I think my first one is, who is Bar Harbor Solar?
So the project, when it's permitted, we create an LLC under which all the different permits and interconnection agreements and approvals are under. So that's really kind of more like a project entity, but the group that owns that LLC is EDP Renewables. So Micah Stanley from that company is on the call. Micah, maybe be helpful to give Matt just kind of a who you are blurb.
Yes, sir. So Matt, thank you for the questions and concerns. So I help represent EDPR. My name is Micah Stanley. My function in the company is to help observe these meetings and build and develop projects safely and soundly, and ensure what we are talking in here and is designed goes into what's happening in the field. EDPR is actually owned by a European company, EDP. So we're a large, globally known company. So we have, you know, financial wherewithal to ensure the project goes forward appropriately, is safe to be built, and goes in as it should. We're not a fly-by-night group. We're here to stay. We own and operate these assets ourselves. These will be here for, you know, 20, 25, 30 years. And we need to ensure that they are able to work and operate as such. And to do so, that also involves us being good neighbors and working with the local population to ensure that everybody's comfortable with the projects as best as possible, and that we build and get a good project for everybody.
So hopefully that's helpful, Matt. I think, why don't I address your question about the tree, what you're asked about what the panels are made of? And then I'd like to just ask you to clarify, maybe help me understand concerns about the tree clearing and runoff. So, you know, the solar panels are inert objects that take the energy from the sun and transfer it into usable energy that, you know, goes into the project equipment and then pushes out to the grid. So the construction of these panels is pretty simple. It's primarily made of an aluminum frame with tempered glass and then silicone that's sandwiched between two different layers of glass. I know, you know, PFAS is a big issue in Maine right now for many farmers. And a lot of people wonder, are these solar panels going to be leaching out PFAS? You know, it's not like they grow solar panels on trees. They're not like organic, right? So they're still obviously, you know, a manufactured process, but there's none of those chemicals in these solar panels. So when it rains, the water simply just comes off of the solar panels and drips onto the ground. As a follow-up, happy to send you, Matt, like a materials sheet of a typical solar panel, so you could see that for yourself. Most solar panel companies are, it's like Ford and Chevy, they're all kind of the same thing. And so, you know, if we show you one, and it's basically how most of them are made. So hopefully that's helpful. It's a common question, so I'm glad you asked it, that we get out of there. So maybe clarify for me, you know, the concerns you have about runoff.
It's just the runoff, you know, does it put any contaminants into the groundwater? You know, is there concern with our wells in the area? And to answer your other question about the tree clearing, that is a very dense forest out behind here that's habitat for many, many different animals that live out here, and not just the birds, but you got a big deer population that's out back there, and they're will be displaced from this. And then just just the sheer amount of clear cutting that you're going to be doing in our backyards is that's 14 acres is a lot to be cutting down in a kind of densely populated, and not densely populated, but wooded area that is going to be pretty significant effective on our properties.
Sure.
So that's
Yeah.
why it's a concern. And is this the I guess the best use of that property?
Yep.
We have a solar array located.
Yep. I think, one thing that would be helpful for you and others that are directly abutting that property, that are going to be right, close to it. It'll be important for you to be able to stay connected to Micah and the construction team, so that you can know when work is proposed to happen, and just so you can kind of be aware and understand what controls should be in place. Not to say that you need to be in a position where you're policing that, but good communication with the butters is helpful to understand that work when it's happening.
And oftentimes as well, Matt, me and the construction teams, and I'll be out to site myself as well, we'll walk through, in limited knowledge, and so everybody is safe, walk you through the site and show you different things that are in place to ensure that everything is happening appropriately. There are many different types of stormwater techniques to ensure no runoff occurs. The simplest and easiest is, Perlex mats, which is straw rollout mats with seed built in, perennial rise that grow very quickly to give you a baseline stabilization, along with riprap rocks if needed, to prevent any type of runoff as it occurs. If it does start to occur, we address instantly. I can also touch on your aquifer question. I have actually built these solar facilities on top of 2 different township-owned aquifers over in Massachusetts. One of the best ones was in Shirley, Mass, is the largest I had done. It was actually 4 different sites when it was finally completed. Mine was a 3.5 megawatt, so a little bit bigger than this. And then the other 2 were about similar sized that I did not own, but I helped to site with the local towns. They went through a very rigorous process of analyzing the typical crystalline module, which we'll be using to ensure that no pollutants or runoffs do contaminate it. So this went through multiple levels of DEQ, DEP reviews to ensure that no chemical contaminants were utilized. Additionally, in our transformers, we use a fluid called FR3, which is basically vegetable oil. And that way, if there is any type of ever leakage, it's vegetable oil that is, in those transformers to keep them cool and operating correctly. An interesting side note is that all of the transformers pretty much created now lend towards this FR3 type of a oil, away from the old TCB, very devastating oil transformers due to the actual solar industry's creation of this. So in the last 15 years, you have seen a huge change to these. They operate as efficiently or better than the old TCB versions and are much less issue prone. They actually rolled these out in a demonstration in a cooking at using these oils, actually cooking food, about 15 years ago at a solar conference. So those are the types of concerns that we look at to ensure that there are no issues, because we don't want any problems ourselves, and we want to be good stewards to the locals and to our own project area.
Thanks, Micah. I don't know if I heard you say this, but I also wanted to, speak into the groundwater issue in wells. We are not using any pesticides on this project, which is actually a DEP regulation. So, the meadow will just grow as it needs to, and won't be managed with any chemicals. And I guess to your question about the wildlife, I certainly appreciate where you're coming from. And we find back to my comment that I made earlier about the Maine Fish and Wildlife agency consultation that we did with them. Obviously we're avoiding protected habitats that are mapped by IF&W. But, to Dave Evers's point, we're trying to also enhance the habitat that will just be a different habitat. And so it's more of a conversion from forest to meadow and creating opportunities for small mammals, birds, bats, pollinators, butterflies, and all that stuff to just change how that land is being used. And so we're not trying to say it's all good, it's all the same. We understand that that's going to displace some animals, but we're also trying to just do what we can to take the new habitat and make sure that it's thriving in the way that it best can. So hopefully that answers your questions, Matt. And I'm also, just as a follow-up, I'm going to have Meryl is going to put her email address in the chat. And so if you guys want to write this down or ask any follow-up questions, or you want some documents, yeah. So she's going to put that in there so you can get in touch. So I think Sarah Stanley was next. Yeah. Hey, Sarah, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm a neighbor as well, a direct abutter, and I think some of the things that Matt mentioned just now, I certainly would like to back up. This is a rural area. It's a wooded lot behind us. There is a lot of deer habitat as well as owls and coyotes. There's a lot going on in this area for sure. When I first heard about this project, I think one of my initial thoughts was, it seems completely displaced as to a location for a solar farm. To clear cut forest to try to do a green energy project seems like it just doesn't make sense to me. I have a handful of questions that are kind of all over the place. One of them being, I know you said that the Maine Department of Inland Wildlife and Fisheries has done mapping of habitats in this area. When were those maps created? Are they recent or are they 25 years old? Because of course, a lot changes development-wise, especially out in this area outside of downtown Bar Harbor in the last 20 years. As far as the buffer behind the houses, I know when you take those pictures and you look in and you say that's 25 feet and you're looking at a lot of trees, a lot of those trees are dead. And when you open up the area 25 feet back, it's not going to look nearly as dense as it does in your picture. I think it's great that you're offering to enhance the buffer. I really don't like that the species you have proposed are not native trees, like Fat Albert spruce, and the other one that's listed there are like blue spruce. They're weed trees. They're not native. They're not going to blend. Certainly, if this goes forward and you're planting things, I would strongly urge the town to encourage native plants be used, especially if you're talking about pollinator species and trying to encourage habitat. That's what should go in there. I'm trying to think. So one other question I had when you were talking more about the technicalities of the system, is there radiation that is created by the when you're taking that solar power and you're putting it into batteries and you're transmitting it into the grid? What happens in that case? I don't understand or know anything about that process. So that would be a question I'd like some information on. And lastly, what are the lifespan of the panels? And when they are at the end of their lifespan, what happens to this solar farm? Thank you for
Yep.
your time.
Okay. So just making sure we write all this down. I'll take it from the top, Sarah, for your questions here. So let's jump into the wildlife question, especially related to how MDIFW does their mapping. So I think, Dave, I'm going to have you unmute here because I want to get your feedback. I know you work with the MDIFW quite a bit, but it's my understanding that these maps are updated frequently. And so like if a species or a habitat is found, then MDIFW updates their data in maps. What you may find online is not how we did our consultation. We actually send an agency consultation letter to Maine Fish and Wildlife with kind of a larger rectangle than what our actual project area is, because we want to generally know what's going on in the area. So when they respond, they're pulling from their databases, not just like the maps that you would find on Beginning with Habitat. Dave, you've probably worked with them. I don't know if you can speak to this to answer Sarah's question about that.
Yeah, sure, Sarah, sure, Chris. Yeah, so the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife they're pretty keen on making sure their mapping or GIS layers are very up to date, because there's these agency consultations that happen daily across the state of Maine. So they're pretty important. The deer yards are very important to them for all the reasons that you're interested in, just to help maintain deer densities across the state. The Natural Areas Program oversees what are those habitats are of greatest interest or of concern. Usually it's the rarer habitats. So if there's a certain rare ecosystem that's near a site, they would identify that site through the Maine Natural Areas Program. And then also the threatened and endangered species, and there's also a category called species of greatest conservation need. So there are laws that protect the threatened endangered species, both state and federal. And there's another tier of protection, or at least interest, I should say, of species that are declining or that are rare. And those declining species, for example, that's what I refer to, where a lot of the species that are declining across the state of Maine are those aerial invertebrates, those flycatchers and swallows and species that are catching insects. That whole avifauna and the food web behind it are all declining dramatically across Maine and in New England and across the US. So that's why there's an interest by the federal government and state government to use these solar arrays that are producing energy to also have this extra add-on value of producing that pollinator sort of food web, that pollinator platform of food web for organisms.
Thanks, Dave. You were asking about, does it really make sense to put solar in a place where you're cutting down a bunch of trees? I assume, Sarah. Why not put it on rooftops? Why not put it on landfills or brownfield sites, right? This is a common question, I think, that has proliferated across any developing market, and Maine is no different than that. The challenge is that we don't have a lot of landfills in Maine that can support these projects. And certainly MDI, with their goals of having solar sited on the island, there's just we don't have these brownfield capabilities. When we look at siting projects in fields, there are similar concerns about the loss of agriculture, the loss of farmland. Also, it's more in people's view shed that would drive by every day. It is such a balance for us to try to figure out where to put projects, but we also don't have an unlimited opportunity to put projects wherever we want. So projects like this one need to have close proximity to three-phase power, which is along Knox there and would work. We also need to have a willing landowner, and we need to have topography and natural resources that can support a project like this, meaning a lack thereof of natural resources. So it is really tough to site solar projects, and it definitely is always a balance. This project was found because the property was listed for sale, which my understanding is that the landowner is from out of state and would have been probably just as happy for it to turn into a subdivision. So I think development was inevitable on this lot, no matter what would happen, given the existing access road, especially that came in there. And so that's why we stepped in and said, well, if it's going to be something, then maybe we can turn it into a project that's a quiet neighbor, and has also a significantly less amount of impact. A subdivision would be a tremendous amount of impact back there, being impervious surfaces, septics, wells, noise. So our hope is that this is less impact there when we think about what could have happened. But when we look at solar projects and cutting down trees, happy to share a study with the group here about what is the net environmental benefit of a solar project. So it's not just about cutting down trees. We had to ship panels from overseas. We had to take our own vehicles to drive to the site to do delineations. there's kind of always this impact. You turn back the label on your shirt and you think, well, how many gallons of water did it take to make my shirt, right? Everything is a bigger impact than we probably even have in front of our faces. So there's an interesting study that I could share that talks about that and analyzed all those different pieces: shipping, manufacturing, construction. And it found that after about 7 years, that is when you start seeing a net environmental benefit to the planet. It's kind of hard to maybe grasp that, but it's not. I think a lot of people think, man, what are we doing here? We're cutting down trees to put in solar. Kind of seems like a wash. And so I'm just trying to communicate that it's about a 7-year payback to the planet with the impact that we're creating. And I'm sorry I'm not trying to rush through your questions, Sarah, if it seems like I'm just trying to make sure we get to other people and go through your list. So yeah, the buffer, dead trees, I think just get in touch with Merrill. I think it'd be important for us to walk the project with you and try to get an understanding of where your house is, set up a time maybe for all of you that live directly next to that and meet it in the future. So totally willing to do that. So native species, that's great feedback. We'll work with Steve Thompson to adjust that. We really just put that together as a typical drawing. And so I think Steve was trying to balance trees that offer the most amount of visual buffering. But I think if that's really great feedback. So we'll take that with the tree planting.
Yeah, we work on every town, every time we do one of these projects is a little different. You might have a town that says, we want a double row of arborvitaes and a shoulder row, around this whole thing. And, that's not very interesting. Some other towns want to go fully native. This is a starting point. It's kind of a mid-ground. And it's something that we can discuss further and try to create something that is a little more in character with this area that hopefully will also achieve the buffering that people are concerned about.
Right. We're trying to make sure we have, things that are really going to prioritize that buffering versus having like red maples out there that only do it half the year. And also trees that are going to grow at a rate that make a meaningful impact quickly. But that's good feedback, Sarah. Thank you. Radiation. I think you're asking maybe about kind of like EMF, right? Like fields and kind of, is there some sort of a, impact to people's health nearby? I'm assuming what you're getting at. So part of your question, you'd mentioned batteries. We're not doing any batteries on this project. So this is not an energy storage project, just solar panels. And the transformer that is going to be installed is no different actually than one you might find outside of a school or a large, building that has its own transformer. Even like if you go outside of Irving, they have transformers too that are pad mounted. So if you stand, maybe like 30 feet away, you would hear a hum that is as loud as people talking having a normal conversation. But at your location where you're at where your house is, we've specifically moved the project equipment away and sited it more towards the center of the project. So you're almost using the solar panels as like a sound buffer. There would be no sound impact to you. And in terms of radiation, we have no documented evidence of that. And again, these are not like specialized pieces of equipment for solar that are kind of new and untested. These are just like kind of off the shelf transformers that are out there in our own neighborhoods and communities. Lifespan of panels, it can range based on the manufacturer, but it's probably safe to assume that they have about a 30-year warranty on the solar panels, but we expect the panels to last 40, 45 years. At year 30, they're expected to perform at about 80% of their potential as they were at year 0. So if you had like a car that was 30 years old that worked 80% of it, 80% as good as it did on day 1, that would be a pretty decent piece of equipment. So our panels there's just not much to them. So there's not like moving parts. There's not parts that get swapped out. They're just kind of basic glass, silicone, aluminum frames. So they tend to last for a long time. But I do appreciate this question because it is a part of the presentation that I neglected, which is about decommissioning. So DEP has actually required us, in addition to what the ordinance has required in Bar Harbor, has required that all projects like this must apply for a decommissioning permit. And they also need to post a form of surety, like a bond or a letter of credit, to cover the cost of the decommissioning should the project fall down. Like, let's say it just goes upside down and it's not working anymore. We don't want you as a community to feel like you're left with this kind of thing in the forest that's not operating. That those decommissioning monies are set aside for that very problem. So we come up with a whole decommissioning estimate and cost, and that'll be included in the submittal to the municipality if you wanted to take a look at it. But there are definitely protections in place, even if EDPR somehow went away, which would be hard to imagine given who's backing them. But that's one way that hopefully you can feel like, you know, you're not going to be left with something in your backyard that should be removed. Okay, we got a lot of questions on the thread here. I guess maybe Angie, was she next, or iPad?
iPad and then.
iPad. I don't know who iPad is. Maybe let us know your name.
iPad, I think, is Lori Bartlett.
Okay.
That's me. Sorry about that.
What's your
I
last
don't know
name,
how
Lori?
to change it. Bartlett.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a couple questions. The proposed build of this thing, how long is it going to take? How much noise are we going to hear? I feel like, you know, one reason we live on this island is because of the beauty of it, the nature. A lot of land here is protected. That's why Acadia National Park began, is to protect the land. And I feel like as landowners, we have a due diligence to protect it and the animals on it. We have a lot of like spotted salamanders in our yard, and we abut you. And there are porcupines and squirrels and chipmunks and everything around here. I'm not happy about this at all. And I'm not happy about the trees being cut. I just wondered how long we're going to have to listen to noise from it being built. You said you're going to pound posts into the ground. You know, I wonder, I don't know how it will affect our groundwater, because everybody here has well water. And that's, you know, I wonder everything will affect that. Contaminants, who's going to test our water? Are you all regulated somehow to test the water periodically to make sure there's no leaching of anything into it? I know you said that the water that drips off of it is just really nothing, but aren't you using water to cool the system at all that you have? Where's that water coming
No,
from?
ma'am.
We'll get, hang on, Micah. Let's start from.
And the other part was, you know, here on Mount Desert Island, land's a premium, and we have a huge housing problem here, and nobody can move here because everything's expensive. There needs to be housing built, and you all are putting in solar panels in an area where, yeah, a subdivision could go. I mean, I think a lot of people would say you put houses back there and you're not going to take, you know, you're taking 14 acres of trees. I still, it's not a pleasant comment, but those are some of my concerns about the project.
Okay. Micah, do you want to answer the question about the water cooling concern that she has, and we'll kind of dovetail that into the question about, yeah, just kind of groundwater. So, yep.
Yep, no problem. Thank you for the concerns, ma'am. One thing that I will mention is we do not use water to cool anything, anything like that. If we do anything, it would be to clean the modules, which in the Northeast, we don't even do that or need to do that. The glass is at an angle of 30 degrees, so the natural rains that occur clean it enough where there's not a need to go and use extra water to go clean things. So there will be no cleaning of modules, but water is not used to cool modules. The only fluids on site is that FR3 fluid for the transformers that I mentioned that are sited in the center of the array, so very far from the peripheral pieces of the properties. Beyond that, I'll also touch on the post-driving piece. with this site, we are actually not driving posts. We're doing some earth screws that will come in due to the amount of rock and ledge in the area. So it'll be a small drill that then puts an earth screw into the ground that the solar modules then racking is attached to that. A lot of the Northeast uses this as a mechanism when you have the amount of rock and issues from that regards. So we'll be doing these small earth screws that go right into the rock and provide a very stable structure for the solar modules in that regards. So there won't be earth, post poundings or anything like that.
Right. So because we don't have like leachate or any sort of chemicals and no pesticides, we're more or less just driving or screwing these foundations into the ground. It's yeah, I don't want to kind of give the impression that we're tapping into the aquifer and then providing a channel for bad things to happen out there, but just sort of given the benign nature of the project equipment as well as the veggie oil that he mentioned in the transformer, we don't have this risk of toxic chemicals that would impact your groundwater and impact your wells. So, it's because of that, we're not providing any sort of source of contaminants, I guess, that could impact your groundwater. Construction timeline, Lori, is maybe Micah can speak to this, but I think, and Micah, would you say 6 months probably for this project? Kind of looking at true start to true finish.
Correct. And the portion of noise would be in the first about 2 to 3 months during the tree clearing. And honestly, the screws aren't that much noise, but you would have, obviously the trucks and construction equipment moving around,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't have the chainsaws or things like that. You wouldn't have a large post drivers, but you would have possible reverse sounds for safety and those components that are required on equipment. But after that first 2 to 3 month period, once those posts are in the ground and the racks are up, that happens very quickly. And then the solar modules are up, then it's all electrical work, which is a much quieter actual process. And you do not have the much large equipment moving around. So it becomes much less noisy at that point. So 6 months is a general max length, I would say, for the project of this size. And the first 3 months would be the more impactful time for the construction noise.
I think if you see the solar panels up, that's your clear sign that probably the noisiest part is past, if that's helpful. The rest of it's wiring and work that's not as noisy. I hear you about land as a premium. I think we're trying to kind of instill a balance. Bar Harbor's got this climate action plan and directives to have 100% of renewable energy for the island produced on the island. And, we certainly appreciate where you're coming from, but we also are, it's tough. Back to this whole siting thing, we're trying to figure out, the best way to do this. And this neighborhood meeting is helpful. So if there's ways that we can mitigate this to, Sarah's points earlier, we're certainly open to that. But we're just trying to kind of transition our state to a new renewable energy paradigm. But totally can appreciate where you're coming from, Sarah or Lori, when it comes to, housing and all that. I know there's some comments here on chat, but I know Angie also had her hand up. So we're going to kind of keep sticking with our flow here of prioritizing people that raise their hands. And we'll certainly get some of the comments in the chat. I think also I would just like to point out if you have a question for the chat, that would be helpful. If there are comments to things that we're saying or other people are saying, it does kind of make it hard to track and respond. So if you're putting something in the chat, please just try to make it a constructive question so that we can respond to it. Thanks, Angie. We got you. We can hear you.
So I have 2 questions. First, when do you anticipate starting construction? And second, how far are the panels located from the 2 vernal pools? And my comment would be, I echo what Lori said. I realize that climate is an issue that the town is trying to tackle, but housing is also an issue. And quite honestly, if we're going to cut 15 acres of trees, I would prefer to see families and housing as the type of development rather than something like this, because our land is at a premium. There's only so much of it. And I think there are other ways to, or maybe other places that are better suited for solar that are undevelopable for housing.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough balance. We get a lot of push from organizations like Maine Audubon and Maine Farmland Trust and NRCM to, where possible, site projects on rooftops and landfills and whatnot. There's just not that, we just don't have that option on the island. And I'm sure you could probably agree, there's not like big, industrial warehouses that are flat where we could put a 2 megawatt project like this. I don't know, 14 acres of rooftop, that's a lot. But at the same time, we're trying to always balance that. And again, trying to meet those very distinct criteria for setting a solar project. So we did look around the island and certainly have looked at options, but again, another part of this is a willing landowner. And so that's why this parcel was chosen. And ultimately will be purchased. EDPR will own that land and be the landowner on it. In terms of like the construction start date, Micah, I know we're trying to get through permitting, so it's a little bit tough to say exactly when that's going to be. And obviously there's coordination that needs to happen with the utility. But can you speak to that about what's a realistic, start construction date?
Depending on when permitting and the utility comes back, we have a lot of the utility information back already. If permitting went through and we have to go ahead to begin designs could be completed in about a month to a month and a half. And I could get a contractor lined up that we've used elsewhere in Maine, probably to begin construction by fall time and be completed by winter, into December time period. So it could be a end of 2020 project. If not, it would probably kick off some tree clearing in the late winter time of 23. So, January or February or March at that point in time. That way you're out of the mud season and we get some of the trees down and start construction then. And it'd be done by summertime at that point of next year.
Yeah, I think, tree clearing activity is important to happen ideally in the winter time, just because it's less impact and we're not running it up as much. Angie, you had also asked about the distance to the vernal pools. I'm just doing a quick measurement on my site plan here. It looks like, because these are significant vernal pools, we do have a 250-foot habitat buffer, but the DEP, we can work with the DEP to obtain a permit to perform some activity to happen within that habitat buffer so as to not impact the value and function of that vernal pool. And so our site plan is strategically kind of balanced that. And I'm measuring from the equipment, it looks like it's anywhere from 200 to 300 feet, something like that, away from the vernal pools. In the application that'll be submitted in the town, they're very clearly called out with a little red polygon around them, so you can see where we mapped those.
Chris, I'm happy to answer this question as well. I'm looking at the site plan. And as you mentioned, we have no impacts within 100 feet of the vernal pools. The closest panel to the southern vernal pool is 200 feet, and the closest panel to the northern vernal pool is about 160 feet.
Okay, so pretty similar. Thanks, Evan. Okay, sorry, I think that's what I had for notes on you, Angie. Hopefully that answered it. Anything else you wanted to ask?
I not really ask. I just, wanted you to be aware that the vernal pool will have a 250-foot shoreland overlay over it that will be subject to the cutting requirements for the shoreland zone.
Right, so there's a shoreline zone buffer actually to the north of the project that we have stayed out of. So we pulled the project away from that northern project boundary to make sure that we're staying out of that area.
Okay,
But
great.
we do have our kind of clearance through DEP with the activity that's happening inside the vernal pool, and they've reviewed that permit
buffer.
application, or sorry, not the vernal pool, the buffer. Thank you, Meryl. Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Do we have any other raised hands here? I don't think so. It tells us if we did. All right, I'm trying to think so some people have about taxes.
We have a raised hand here from
Oh,
Dave.
Dave. Okay, great. I see you now, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I'll make this pretty quick. I had some comments regarding the vegetation that you were going to do the buffer with, like Sarah pointed out. And I want to reinforce that idea of utilizing native species. I have the unfortunate experience of having to deal with invasive species on this island, which have been brought in for various reasons and have taken control in some areas and have caused significant issues. But more importantly, the impact they're going to have on the wildlife here. And you might be following some of Mike's comments regarding birds, etc. In the chat. Yeah, he knows what's going on in regard to birds and other wildlife that utilizes the vegetation. So I hope you really take that seriously. The other part I just don't want to dwell on because it's in one way I'm fortunate because I'm quite a distance away from where the solar array is actually going to be placed. But you are using my property, you're crossing my property, the right of way is on my property to access the land. So I was hoping that I might have an opportunity to maybe work with someone to kind of discuss maybe equipment locations and so on and so forth to minimize the utilization of property that I actually own and pay taxes on.
Yep.
That kind of thing. And I don't want to waste, valuable time or other people's time, talking about that. But I would like to, connect with somebody about that.
Yep. That's great. I'm glad you let us know who you were because that's an important piece of this. So yeah, a couple comments, certainly echo what you're saying about the species selection. We'll definitely take a look at that and, wanted to just put something out there, at least to start with. But in terms of using the road that's existing on your property, I want to just point out that, any damage that may happen to that road, or if it interferes with your ability to get in and out of that road, that is a non-starter for us. So if there's some sort of, tracks or somebody goes off the road or whatever, it's EDPR's job to bring that road back to its current condition or improve it any further. So, just want to give you that assurance. But lastly, definitely important for you to meet with them from a pre-construction standpoint. Where's the project going? There's going to be a flagging process that would outline exactly where the center line of any sort of road that would be built or tree clearing would happen. So I think if you could maybe email Meryl, her email's in the chat, your contact information, then we can log you down and make sure that you get the proper contact information for folks at EDPR as well. But again, just maybe put that in an email to her versus in the chat, so we're not distributing.
All right. Yeah, thanks. I'll see if I can locate that. But if not, I did get a letter. It's pretty obvious who I am and where my property is located.
Yeah.
So I'm
We know
sure
where you
you'll
are.
be able to connect with me if somehow I
Sure.
don't find that.
Sure.
So
No.
anyway, yeah, appreciate the feedback on that.
Yep. Thanks, Dave.
And, if anyone has recommendations on, we've worked with the community on even plant selection on other projects, email Meryl if you have things you'd like to see out there, and we can see if this is something that can work, for the project and for the screening.
And we'll certainly prioritize recommendations of the people that live right at that point. So
Yeah, it's a more efficient process if we can just all work together on that particular front.
Great.
Hey, guys, I don't have a hand. I don't have a
We can hear
chat.
you, Michael. Yep, that works.
Okay. Well, I put a bunch of comments up there. We've been dealing with another clear cut right up the road, which was a shock to our community. And, you know, in light of the comments that I have made about the bird species that are going to be affected, I'm wondering if anybody has put any effort in to study any of the bird populations out there. I mean, you guys already know that I have decades of eBird data. I have 129 species of birds that I've recorded over on the Knox Road. On the opposite side, it's a slightly different habitat, but it's very similar in its forest structure makeup. And that's a huge concern for me. I want to echo Angie. She's right on about, you know, this project versus a subdivision is almost worse in my mind because of the extent of the cut. A subdivision is going to be, you know, houses. Hopefully, they're going to be keeping trees. You know, hermit thrushes will still survive in those kind of habitats, but in this kind of a place, you guys are wiping out everything that was part of that forest structure. So I think that structure and the loss of the web of life that goes on in there, because it's a contiguous forest, is a really huge thing to put in the context when thinking about this project. So thank you very much. And also thank you very much for talking with me the other day, guys. I totally appreciated that. I know there's some real concern. I appreciate everybody on Lupin Way who is going to be abutted up to this thing, the noise and the extent of the initial damage is going to be quite huge. So anyway, I'm just curious about who studied the birds out there, who's put some effort into that. And I really appreciate it.
Sure.
You know,
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it was good talking to you too as well. You know, give me a call if you have other questions. You've got my number. So hey, Dave Evers, I think you're still on. You know, Dave, can you speak to, Michael, to your question, we haven't performed an on-site study out there, but what I want Dave to speak to is, what does he kind of talking about post-impact and what he expects would happen with that site. I want to try to also clarify that we don't view this as like destruction. We view this as just a change in habitat. I don't diminish where you're coming from, Michael, but I want to be careful to not use words like destroy because it's more of a modification. So again, I'm not trying to minimize your concerns and all that, but we're not paving a Walmart parking lot here either. So Dave, could you speak to that about what you think will happen with this site when we talk about like existing species? And Michael has also listed some of the species that are out there in the chat if you want to use that as a reference point.
Sure. And, and Michael's right on in that there will be a change and the avifauna will change dramatically. And, from my standpoint, I think of things at both local, regional, state, and even continental levels. And those are the layers that are hard to maybe discuss or see sometimes because, I think it is important what's happening in your backyard for certain. And I think of it as just like climate change, there'll be winners and losers. With the conversion of that forest over to a solar array that has this buffer habitat that I think is important to enhance as the best of our ability, there again will be winners and losers. The losers will be those deeper forest species. There's no question. As you mentioned, Michael, the wood thrushes that are there, the blackback woodpeckers, they won't have a forest to live in any longer. The winners, though, can be, for example, the small rodent population will increase, both rodents and shrews. And that small mammal density will be higher than what you'd see in a forest. Not just because there'll be the open areas, but those open areas will be enhanced. So there'll be more meadow voles, more peromyscus, more white-footed mice, etc. And so actually owl species would do better from a standpoint of where they can feed. They can't nest there, but if they can have nesting habitat nearby, these sort of feeding areas, like a bird feeder, would potentially enhance what they need. You mentioned goshawks. Goshawks need large tracts of forest. Goshawks also like snowshoe hare. Snowshoe hare like these edge areas. And so then there again, the change in that habitat type maybe goes from areas that they can actually use for roosting or breeding or nesting habitat area, but they can become more of a feeding or forage area. So those are the winners. There's definitely the losers, and then there's species that would come in the area that aren't even there now, and that's a group that I'm really worried about, are those aerial invertebrates that are catching bugs up in the air. They're declining dramatically across Maine, across the U.S., and how can we help those sort of species? So there's just like the broader, different spatial sort of look at things, the look at maybe seasonality, and the look at how different species use in the area across breeding and foraging needs. So, Michael, I hear you. I'm sure there's a lot that will change for sure. I don't know how else to look at it. The only thing I can think of is that how can we best enhance that area once it's converted over?
Thanks, Dave. Just also as a follow-up, I think it might be helpful to remind the group that this parcel is 53 acres and our clearing area is only 13.8. So what's the math on that? But 53 minus 14. So there's still 39 acres of forested land that will remain untouched in this part of it. We're just taking out a smaller section. So again, Michael, not minimizing what you're saying, but I want to make it clear that it's not as if we're removing the entire forest around the neighborhood.
Well, I'll just point out too that the size of the area that you're going to cut is the same size as my property. So when I think about that, it just kind of blows my mind when I know what kind of life is out there. And I appreciate what Dave's saying. There's going to be a transition. That's absolutely for sure. I am really concerned though about the long-term effects of all of these. I've said this 1,000 times in the last week. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and we're gonna chop down this forest. And I'm not sure how much effort you've put into finding another location, but I know that in projects that I've worked on in the past where we thought we're as an electricity project, we found this a perfect place for what we were looking for. So, if there's any way to find another place and not cut down 14 acres, I think that puts us more in that green direction than where we are right now with this project. I think everybody on this chat right now is looking at the concept of cutting down the forest for a solar array when we know there are other open spaces or other places that could work. So,
well,
anyway, thank
sure. Yeah, I think, probably also something that's helpful from a siting perspective is we actually did have a consultation call with the National Park Service about what they feel is a good use of space. And, we did show that little yellow arrow pointing at where the project would be. So obviously no big impact from the top of Cadillac, and it's indiscernible. You would just see a power pole. You wouldn't even know that it's there. That's just another constraint that we face. MDI has got a lot of conserved land. It's got a lot of land that's special. Proximity to the National Park Service is a unique aspect to siting that we find on top of what's already tricky. I can assure you we did look around. It wasn't like, hey, let's take the first thing that we come here. We knew that Bar Harbor was going to be a sensitive community to this. And so I guess I just want to assure you that we've looked at that, and likely would receive pushback if we put it in a field somewhere as well. It's probably, no matter where we were going to put it, we were going to have comments like this. So I just wanted to at least show what due diligence we've put into this project in its in the siting.
Can I ask just one more thing? I've thought about this. You're talking about taking 14 acres. What if you reduce the size by going up with the panels instead of spreading them out? I mean, incrementally going up so the next panel is up above the next panel, and you just keep going up higher. And that way you're cutting less of the forest, you're using less of that space, and you're still getting the same number of solar panels. So it's just an idea that I don't know if anybody's thought about it, but I just wanted to throw that out there as just
Yeah.
wondering about that concept.
Yeah, it's unfortunately probably not a good best practice. You'd be left with a structure that's a couple 100 feet tall. And I'm assuming that the group would probably not favor that versus something that's 12 feet tall. So. Yeah, we have sacrificed the energy production of this project. So we have a certain target that we applied for when the project was submitted to Versant. 2 megawatts is the size of the project. Best practices for solar array shading and clearing and like how far out we would ideally like to go. Obviously, there's constraints like wetlands and vernal pools would have been to clear far more acreage. We probably would have cleared up to 20 acres if we were able to, under like, sort of a benign look at it by saying, well, forget about sort of any impacts or concerns, we would clear much more. So I can assure you, we've actually already shrunk this down to the point where the project has probably lost a little bit of efficiency otherwise in order to do our best with abutters, vernal pools, wetlands, and all that. So, yeah.
Then why do it here?
Well, Lori, we looked at a lot of different project sites on the island, and again, because of the constraints due to needing 3-phase and needing to have a willing landowner and having land that's suitable for this one checked those boxes for us. Whereas not every location in Bar Harbor is possible for us to put a solar project.
And only certain districts in Bar Harbor allow solar as well. So that also kind of shrunk the
Right, in terms
the
of
available area.
what the zoning allows in the ordinance.
Maybe.
Matt, did you have another question?
I do. I find it interesting using the term winners and losers in this conversation, because I see a lot of losers in this, being us, abutting property owners, losing the habitat here. I mean, you can put all the trees up you want, but we're going to see it. That's just the reality of it. It's going to be out there. It's going to displace a lot of habitat. It supports a lot of habitat, but it's going to displace a lot of habitat. We're losing, it's been talked about, potential area for housing. That's a loss for this community as well. When we're taking land that could be used for housing, it's well identified in this community that housing is a huge need to support this community. And we're going to be taking valuable land that could be used for housing for this project. And I see that there's a lot of losing in this. And from where I'm sitting and what I'm listening to, this project is a go on your behalf. I don't know if, from what I'm hearing and the terms being used, this is being planned, this is being done, and it's going in our backyards. And I see a lot of losers. And Dave, thanks for using the term winners or losers, because I certainly know where I'm sitting on this fence. So I feel it's unfortunate that this land is going to be used. I'd much rather know that we have housing and families out behind here than 14 acres of a solar array.
Yeah. I hear you. And the reason we're doing this neighborhood call outside of a planning board meeting to do, a meeting with you guys sort of off the books, so to speak, is to hear those comments. Certainly this project is proposed, Matt. I don't want to make it sound like it's definitely happening and this is to placate you guys with some sort of, meeting here. We have yet to work with the planning board and all this. I know that the ordinance is relatively new, so they're going to be working through that for the first time, but we're trying to do our best to conform with what standards they have and to make sure that you guys have a voice. I think also, this certainly isn't the last time that you could have a comment on this project. Certainly would encourage you to participate in the planning board process. There will be opportunities for public comment, and reach out to Michelle Gagnon on that to solicit your feedback so that the town can hear it. But I hear where you're coming from, Matt. We don't want to make it sound like there are losers in this, and you guys are kind of the unfortunate losers, I guess. I want to maybe help people understand that there's an opportunity also with this project, and that we're trying to paint neighbors or paint a picture that this is a project to actually help Mainers. And that even you guys, if you wanted to subscribe to this project, would be able to benefit from it. So I know that may not totally solve all your problems and say, okay, never mind, I totally love this project. But I do want to point out that it's not as if it's like a substation or sort of something that benefits Massachusetts. This is really to benefit people that are within Versant territory. I think Lori may have another comment, unless that's Lori. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you're saying that, we can apply to be, I don't know what the word you just used, subscribers or whatever, to be, benefit from this. If you're going to put it here, shouldn't we be anyway? I mean, as abutters to this place, shouldn't we just naturally be? But I mean, I personally would rather just, we've had birds here that, quite frankly, I don't know what the word to it was, what the name of it was, but it's here because we have mature forests. And the first time I actually saw it come was last year. And you're going to drive that off. I know you're saying 14 acres, but 14 acres is 14 acres on a pristine island in, I'm getting off topic, but if you're saying we could be subscribers to this, whatever, I think we should be naturally anyway.
Yeah, it's a little tricky just from an electrical standpoint to accommodate that for you guys to like hook into the project, just because of how this hooks into the grid. But any project that's within Versant territory is something that you could benefit from, just to be clear. So it doesn't need to be that you benefit from the thing that's right next to your house or right next to your, or in your same community. But I'm just trying to tie the benefit of this to you guys locally to understand that you could benefit from it, and that there's, anyway, so I'm just trying to clarify what you're saying. I'm trying to remember the other comment. Well, I just, I'm trying
I just want to make a point on that piece. So, but we could benefit even if that's not in my backyards. If that's even in another town, we could benefit.
That's right. That's right.
So it doesn't have to be there for us to benefit.
That's right. I'm just pointing out that I'm just trying to help you understand the program rules about how these solar projects benefit people. I think the common assumption is that only people in that town can benefit because it's connecting to the local grid there, but it's really meant to serve people that live within that utility territory. Angie, and then we're probably going to try to wrap this up here as well here by 6:30. So
Sort of on that same vein. So you could develop this project in Lemoyne or Trenton or Ellsworth, and Bar Harbor could still benefit from it. It doesn't have to be in Bar Harbor on land that's forested in order for us to benefit.
well, your town has issued an edict to develop solar projects on MDL.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, let's be clear, it doesn't have to be in Bar Harbor for Bar Harbor residents
Yep,
to benefit from.
That is true.
Okay.
That is true. But I also want to make a clarifying point that to say that this project should go to Trenton, those communities also face similar conversations to this, where they have projects most every community in Maine has a project proposed in it. And at the same time, only so many projects can be built in those communities because of the capacity at the substation. So, do a Google search in your nearby community. I've permitted 2 projects in Ellsworth, and I know there are others nearby. There's definitely, we call it distributed generation. So we're kind of moving all these projects all around the state in different locations so that, we're spreading out that power evenly across the grid. So yeah, I think you're coming at it from like a technical question, not so much philosophical.
Well,
Yeah,
I just wanted to be clear. In order for Bar Harbor to benefit, it didn't have to be
that's right.
right here in Bar Harbor.
Right. Yep. Somebody in Bangor could sign up for this, vice versa. So. Okay. I'm not sure if there are clear questions here on the comment here. I'm seeing a lot of kind of comments, but maybe not as many questions. So anyway, I think I'd like to
Someone
wrap
asked
this
when
up.
there'll be a planning board meeting. Sorry.
That's a good question. Meryl, do you know that? Based on submittal targets?
The planning board meeting is on April 6th, and we have quite a few meetings with the town prior to that meeting. So we're submitting our application on March 10th, so in a few days. And then we work with the town to make sure that we have everything we need just to be evaluated. And then we'll talk about that on the April 6th meeting.
Yeah, we expect this to be, multi-meetings. Usually the first meeting is a presentation of the project, similar to what we did tonight. And so by no means is it like approved in that meeting. Obviously, this is the first time Bar Harbor is going through and utilizing the new solar ordinance. So I would just reach out to Michelle about this with comments or questions you have. And, we're all about public comment and transparency. We may not be able to address everybody's issues and kind of have everybody get what they would like on it, but we are committed to hearing you out and making sure that we're available in a resource. And especially for the people that live directly next to the project, I think it's important for us to, have your contact information and allow you to be able to be in touch, throughout the development phase, especially with the town and even during construction, if the project moves ahead. I think, Michael, were you asking a question there? I saw you talking, but I didn't know if you were trying to say something here at the end. Didn't want to.
No. I think my lips were moving, but I wasn't really,
Okay.
wasn't really saying.
Sorry.
Just thanks a lot for putting this out there. I mean, I guess I understand where everybody's coming from. I'm still trying to get over what happened the other day. So for those of my neighbors who are struggling with this project, I'm available to talk anytime you guys want to, but I appreciate what you're going through, and we'll just have to see where everything goes. But thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate your time.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, sorry to jump in, but there was a question that right at the end that's about taxation, I think.
Sure. The project, we're trying to shake this out in Maine. So right now, the state of Maine has a program in place to handle how towns are compensated for taxes on the project. So the land tax would still be paid. So EDPR is going to be the landowner, and they would continue to pay tax on that land. But then you say, well, there's this new asset on the land, and how does that get adjusted? So the equipment at its current understanding with the state of Maine, and really in most states across the US, the equipment is, in terms of the personal property tax, is tax-free. And so the way the state of Maine has countered this is they've created a program so that towns can work with the state to find out what the project would have been worth and assessed, and then they'll be reimbursed for up to 50% of that amount. It's a program that is being evaluated by Maine Municipal Association, and they're well aware of the need to provide more clarity on that. But that's the current status on how taxes work for these projects. And the same is true if you guys put solar on your own home, that equipment would be tax-free. So this project is no different. Thanks, Steve. All right, again, you've got Meryl's contact information, meryl.reed@brienvironmental.org. We really appreciate everybody attending tonight. I know it's getting late here, but thanks for your comments. We mean that.
Lastly, I did see a question about the stormwater and where someone can find that. And that'll be in our municipal application with our submittal. So the whole stormwater report from BH2M will be in there.
Yeah, really the whole application is pretty thorough, and I think you guys can understand the amount of due diligence that we're doing. So reach out to Michelle if you want to get copies of that after we submit it here. So, okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.